Watchers in the Fourth Dimension.
I won't!
But you've done it, boy. A perfect impersonation of yourself.
I think it does us good to be reminded the universe isn't entirely peopled with nasty creatures out of themselves.
You made us vanity, but we are free.
Hello and welcome back to Watchers in the Fourth Dimension. I'm Anthony.
I'm Diana.
I'm Julie.
And I'm Riley. And if we could cook your memories, Rutha, then we should feast indeed. Ha 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 ha.
And this episode, we are finally getting started on the Fifth Doctor as we discuss his opening story, Castrovalva. But before we get into that, Riley's going to take a quite long look at the mail because we have a little bit of an irregular recording schedule right now. So he's going to cover 2 episodes worth of mail. Over to you, Riley.
Thank you, Anthony. First up, let's go through the Legopolis mail. We have good friend R.L. Gray, who says, "Hey, Watchers, it was great fun listening to your take on one of my favorite stories. Yes, it makes no sense. But that didn't stop us with Warrior's Gate now, did it? I'm okay with Doctor Who now then functioning on mood rather than coherent plot. A few notes. I also like the dynamic between the Fourth Doctor and Adric. It has a nice sort of uncle-nephew quality, and it's a shame we didn't get more of it. Did Big Finish in fact do any with just the 2 of them? Don't look at me. Do we have an answer on that one? We might have to look that up. As one of you noted, Grampus is the genus name of the Risso's dolphin. It's also an old name for the orca or killer whale. Maybe wheezing like a Grampus refers to the sounds of their speech. That is fascinating. Okay.
I love that.
Yeah. Anthony, I absolutely understood what you said about entropy at the 13-minute mark. Basically, it's about the decay of organized matter and information into undifferentiated soup, because there's no energy left to keep it all together. What's my prize? Do you have a prize, Anthony?
Prize can be redeemed when you phrase it in a way I understand.
Fair enough. I think the idea of the resolution of the CVE business is that the information they beam out from the Pharaoh's transmitter reconstructs the CVE so that it will continue to operate indefinitely, allowing thermodynamic energy to keep cycling and the universe to continue operating. The Master could send a calculation that would close the CVE again, but only if that cable outside the control room is still connected. Therefore, the Doctor goes out to disconnect it. I, once again, will reiterate, I was probably asleep at this moment, so I don't remember that part of the serial. Although the shot of Sarah Jane is from Tom Baker episode, the shot of the Brigadier was not. The production team weren't able to find quite the right one, so they used the one from Invasion of the Dinosaurs instead. I believe we mentioned that, didn't we? When we recorded, I think we did.
I think I might have.
Yeah.
We joked about, I think, Sarah Jane possibly being from a Third Doctor episode. You know, it is kind of funny that one of the other characters was from a Third Doctor story,
Yes.
but not Sarah Jane.
And he finishes up with, since Julie, I think, said something about Daleks on the Love Boat, that was me, Riley. He made for us all a wonderful Photoshop of a Dalek in the opening title sequence of the Love Boat. It is quite lovely. I always enjoy when people do this. And I'm ready for the rest of the Who villains to get the very same treatment.
Yes.
Moving on. Good friend Alan Seiler says, I'm definitely in the minority. Legopolis is boring. Double exclamation mark on that. An epic Doctor with an epic 7-year run deserves an epic send-off, and this ain't it. The plot makes no sense. The Legopolis sets aren't very good. Ainley does not make a good first impression as the Master, and the whole thing is dull. There are only 2 very good things about this story, Nyssa and Tegan, and both of them go on to much better things in later seasons. I don't think I've ever scored a story lower than all 4 Watchers before, but this one only gets 4 dildo-shaped weapons out of 10 for me. Having said that, your review had me laughing out loud at work. I love it when Doctor Who stories make no sense because you all have so much fun tearing it apart. Well, thank you, Alan.
Oh, you're going to love today's episode.
Jamie Carlson says, Legopolis also reminds me of the 9 billion names of God, though more probably Kabbalah inspired both. I am unfamiliar. I might have to look that up. Poor Tegan, having the first day of work from hell. Such an RTD type companion intro. I think Tegan and Donna need to go out for drinks.
Yes.
Yes, that is good. I like that. Ainley is wild. I think Sim would tell him to dial it back a bit. The foreshadowing in the beginning with the cloister bells is nicely ominous. Overall, an odd end for a great Doctor. That's very succinct and on point. Bill Stevens says the sense of foreboding, backed up by Patty Kingsland's excellent music, overshadows the plot, which is definitely worked backwards. It's more of a series of set pieces. I've always wondered what passing drivers on the Barnet bypass made of the Watcher. The inner TARDIS sets are great. I take the Doctor saving the day by pulling out a cable in the same spirit as Indiana Jones shooting the knife-wielding thug, showing that simpler things can work. The atmosphere alone carries the story, which gets an 8.5 incompetent detective inspectors out of 10. There is a lot of range here in opinion in regards to what people feel about Logopolis. Some rated very highly, some not so much. Moving on, and this is one of those that rates it very well. David Gordon says, I always love a story with atmosphere, and this one has atmosphere in spades.
I agree with that.
Okay. I do not. Anthony Ainley gives possibly his best performance as the Master before, spoiler alert, descending into the pantomime villain of later years. Oh, God. Even Tegan isn't annoying in this one, although it is interesting that she names her knees. Since there's an overlooked fluff in part 1 where she says, quote, my knee, my name's Tegan Javanka. Love this back in the day, and I think it still holds up now. Granted, the whole flush the Master out sequence doesn't make a lot of sense, but we've all overlooked flaws in otherwise excellent stories. This is getting 10 Barnet bypasses out of 10.
Excuse me?
Good Lord.
I know.
Wow.
David, we need to talk, my friend.
Simmer
Look,
down,
I
David.
liked it, but that's a lot.
Well, get ready. We keep going. Adam Wright says, Logopolis is a bit of nostalgia for me. I didn't get deeply into Doctor Who until 2017 when I chose to binge watch New Who. I was too overwhelmed with the sheer amount of classic Who to try to watch it. However, I purchased the 4th Doctor sampler on Voodoo, which included Robot and Logopolis. These stories were my entry point for classic Who. I've watched both many times just because they are on my player. Meeting Janet Fielding at Wholanta locked my love for Logopolis firmly in place. The TARDIS trio is my favorite. I look forward to Diana and Julie giving more Adric love. Not allowed. Now, does this story have flaws? Yes. But this story boasts the most memorable regeneration scene in classic Who in my book. Wow, that's a statement. 10 out of 10 moments that have been prepared for. Don't know. Yeah.
Adam, we liked you so much.
When you look at it, it is memorable. I wouldn't say that means it's good. It's memorable.
Mm-hmm.
What an odd couple of episodes for Voodoo to be like, these are what I'm going to give you. These two. For the 4th
Just gives you the
Doctor.
bookends, you know?
Yeah. And so considering that is what he was given, like I can understand that there's that like overriding, this was my entry point. But, love to love it. I love to see it.
I mean, and that's just the nature of the show. I've been doing a little New Who rewatching right now, and I have come to realize that I have very, very strong biases based off when I started watching the show live compared to any other time of watching the show. And so we'll get to that in 5 years' time.
Hang on. I do want to say, I probably saw Logopolis for the first time in probably about 1995. So we're talking 30 years ago. And you all know, I loves me a little bit of childhood nostalgia. This ain't it.
For once.
Shut up.
Kirsten Doherty says, I have to rewatch the story as last time I saw it, I was watching it on a VHS tape. Wow.
So in about 1995.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. I remember really not liking it because I thought it was depressing and it felt like I was watching a funeral. I also remember really thinking that Tom deserved a better story to go out on and a bit miffed that they chose his last story to introduce a new companion. It took away from Tom. But I'm willing to watch it again and see if I have a new opinion. And that's the end of the comment there. Kirsten, please tell us what your new opinion is. Please. You're leaving us hanging in suspense. All right, moving on. Ben Flay says, never a fan of this. First seen on repeat on Sky TV in the 90s. It's a terrible story for 4 to go out on. Bidmead is dull as a writer. He can't write Doctor Who. Too much maths computations. Too many companions. Music well strapped in its 80s with hello synth and drum machines. It gets much worse. It's very Sherlock Holmes fall, but boring. No tension nor drama. Makes no sense. It's a mess. Ainley is the pantomime villain of J&T Dreams. Get used to it. He's in it. A lot to come. 10 phallic weapons and false spears out of 10. What the hell just happened? I know.
Good Lord.
I'm sorry, Ben. I'm sorry. His rating, I thought that was just a separation in his comment. It's actually -10 phallic weapons and false spirits out of 10.
Okay. I was going to say, tell us how you really feel, man.
I know, that was such a ride, wasn't it?
That's brutal.
Hayden Chubb says, lots of atmosphere, but then it was the end of a 7-year era. Very light on plot. A man in white telling characters off screen what to do next is pretty lame. 11-year-old me loved it as a kid. Adult me gets very frustrated. I'm going to give it 6 out of 10 very bad pieces of AstroTurf. Tony Monticello says, and thus, with the introduction of Tegan and the regeneration of the Fourth Doctor, the transformation into the JNT era proper is complete. It's been a wild ride, season 18, but I imagine I'll have a lot more to say once we do the season review. I've been sitting on many of my thoughts to avoid spoilers, but the right time is around the corner, and this may be a theme here, but we are also covering the Mail Today season 18 retrospective. I did not see Tony's comment, so Tony, please tell us what your thoughts are. Moving on, Kieran James Evans says, VHS nostalgia time. By the library which my mom worked at. Yes, it does have some plot holes, but I do really like overall atmosphere. Science is a loose term here. The logopollutions. Anthony can help me out with that since I always seem to get it wrong. Logopolitans, thank you. Speaking mass into existence is just magic. They are space wizards. Anthony read out the physics description of entropy. This story seems to run with a more general idea of it, which isn't that dissimilar from how it was described during my chemistry undergrad. There is a line that says the code that the Doctor and the Master sends to the CVE is self-sustaining. But Doctor pulling the plug stops the Master from stopping it. It gets 7.5 out of 10. Tegan's interview performance scores. Mark Dunstan writes, although it made no sense, I did enjoy it, especially episode 1. I thought that the production team could have come up with a better story for Tom Baker. No monsters for him to battle with, only men with bad hairstyles. The ending was sad and well done for one of the best actors to play the Doctor. The music was fantastic as well as the performances. Most of the stories from now on will be painfully slow. Well, thanks, Mark. That's something to look forward to. Nicholas Rutherford writes, this feels quite like a milestone. Well done, watchers. Plus, you taught me something I never knew. Logopolis means city of words in Greek. That only took 44 years. David Holt writes, an interesting one for me since it's got some fantastic moments that are brought down by later stories. Such optimism going on with these future stories and these mails today. Jeez. For example, Nyssa has her planet destroyed and her father's body hijacked by the Master, which leads to a really great character moment and performance from Sarah Sutton as Nyssa watches the destruction of Traken. But this never comes up again. Similarly, with Tegan, her aunt was murdered and she doesn't acknowledge it outside of the story. Not a problem with the story itself, I suppose, but with the format of the show at the time. We do get to meet one of my favorite companions in Tegan, and she's very divisive, and I'm looking forward to see how you would find her. Agree with Riley that this isn't a great regeneration story, though. For a Doctor with such a long run, his death is somewhat anticlimactic, and the Master could have been used better in bringing it about. Though I do love Ainley's performance. Overall, I'd give this story 7 out of 10 numerological gibberish, but if it wasn't for the changes it brought to the show, the score would probably be lower. Bring on Davison. Now, we're going to move over to the season 18 retrospective, and this is a bit less than what we got for Logopolis. I'll start off with Austin D. Patterson, who writes, Diana, I'm just like you. I wear my 6th Doctor coat all the time, and even if people don't know what it is, they compliment it.
Which I need so bad.
We all know how pretty Austin is, and I bet he kills that 6th Doctor coat.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Doctor Who 60s, 70s, and 80s says, aha, I knew it. I said you'd miss the Looney Tunes Tom, and now Riley said he is nostalgic for the era. Graham Williams' Tom is so much more fun than the sulky version we get in season 18. Oh, and Anthony is totally wrong. Season 18 Tom is nothing like seasons 12 to 14. He was a miserable git, and I'm glad he fell from the telescope.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, great episode as always. Looking forward to hearing your take on season 19. And Nathan Lawless has written in with his rankings of episodes for that season. And he starts from, let's go from the bottom to the top. Meglos, Warrior's Gate, The Leisure Hive, Full Circle, Logopolis, The Keeper of Traken, and Stay of Decay. Adam Wright follows up with, I like season 18 for the transitional bridge that it is. I love Tom Baker because he's the reason I explored Doctor Who. I knew him first as Puddle Glum and started... I love it when we hear these shows that British actors are on before Doctor Who or after. I love the titles. They're always things like Puddle Glum.
Mm-hmm.
It's hilarious. Anyway, I knew him first as Puddle Glum and started exploring this Whovian world as a result. His last season reminds me of watching an adventure in time and space where William Hartnell starts to feel the need to leave because of the newer, younger faces around him and changes to the show. Baker just seems darker because he stayed too long, plus he was sick that season. I still liked this season and would rewatch anytime, looking forward to Davison. Keith Burton says, I was 11 when season 18 went out. The serious tone was a shock after the shenanigans of season 17, but it arrived at just the right moment for me. As I left junior school and went to secondary school, it seemed like the show was growing up with me. I still think season 18 and 19 are a wonderful saga you can enjoy as one tale. Just skip Meklos and Time Flight. All right, we received a direct email, and it is a bit long, but I thought this was really, really nice. So, listeners, if you want to skip forward a little bit, that's totally fine, but I feel like this needs to be read. So this is from Andrew Wilcox. Dear Watchers, first off, congratulations on another excellent episode. I've been looking forward to you reaching this point ever since I first started listening, as this is my era of Doctor Who. It's been fantastic hearing your insights on the Fourth Doctor's final stories, and Logopolis in particular is one I've always found fascinating, both as a piece of sci-fi and as something that draws on real scientific ideas. In fairness, Logopolis might seem heavy on the technobabble to someone who wasn't a computer nerd in the early 80s, but to those of us who were, who I suspect the story was aimed at, it makes a surprising amount of sense. Back then, if you wanted to get a computer to do anything efficiently, you couldn't just rely on BASIC. You had to speak to it in its own low-level language, like assembly language or machine code. Debugging was carried out via a program called a machine code monitor. And here's where Logopolis gets really interesting. At one point, the monitor and Adric actually refer to, quote, registers while working through block transfer computations. In machine code programming, registers are the tiny storage spaces inside a computer's memory where key values are held and manipulated during execution. Debugging at this level often meant working directly with registers, checking and modifying them manually, exactly what the Logopolitans are doing with their computation. Looking at Logopolis through this lens, the story plays out like a cosmic scale computer failure. And this is why I wanted to read this piece of mail, because I think it's fair for all the crap we give Logopolis that someone might actually put it together for us and make it make sense.
Oh my God, it's a 10.
Number 1, Logopolis as a CPU. Logopolitans function like a central processing unit, running block transfer computations, which are essentially low-level machine instructions keeping the universe stable. 2, the master is malware. His interference is a viral insertion of bad data corrupting the system, much like a virus causing a system-wide crash. 3, the monitor and Adric debugging the registers in hexadecimal number format. Their slow, methodical approach to checking computations and registers mirrors manually debugging machine code in a monitor program. 4, the Watcher as a recovery mechanism. Watching from the periphery, the Watcher functions like a fail-safe routine, stepping in just before the system crashes and triggering a controlled regeneration, a reboot. Wow. All right, so I can understand that. I get that. He also goes on and starts talking about entropy, but I will then now cut to the end because it's a wonderful piece of mail. It's just very, very detailed. So I will finish up. Watching Doctor Who as a tween, especially this season, played a huge role in inspiring me to become a scientist. The mix of big ideas, logical problem solving, and treating science as something that could be both thrilling and world-changing had a massive impact on me. Logopolis, in particular, with its blend of physics, mathematics, and existential stakes, showed me that science wasn't just something from a textbook. It was something that could shape reality itself. So given that Logopolis not only delivers a brilliant explanation of entropy, but also draws on concepts of machine code, debugging, and computer viruses that were emerging in competing circles at the time, I have to ask, do I get the prize Anthony mentioned for explaining entropy?
You're trying your hardest to make me actually come up with a prize.
In lieu of the prize, however, I'd happily take the honorary title of scientific advisor to the Watchers. After all, every excellent podcast team needs one. Looking forward to your thoughts. Does this make the Master a Time Lord hacker? And is Logopolis a story about debugging the universe? Logopolis gets 8 out of 10 joules per Kelvin from me, with 2 taken off for police incompetence and dodgy bicycle shenanigans. Keep on watching, you wonderful people. So,
Aww.
I know, very, very sweet, very, very detailed. And before we wrap up on that, with that very well-written, well-thought-out email, we're going to finish up with our last piece of mail.
Hang on, Riley, very quickly. Yes, that is the prize. Scientific advisor to the podcast.
Wait. I'm a scientist. I want to be the scientific advisor.
Well,
But-
you're on the podcast. You can't advise us.
Okay, fair enough. You can be the scientific advisor because I fell in love with that answer.
Like I said, there's more to it. It's just we don't have the time to cover the entropy section, but I just thought that it was a fair shape because it was so well written and we had given that episode or that serial such crap, and it makes sense.
Beautiful. I love
Yeah.
it.
And as I was going to say, after such a well-written, long email, we're going to go back to season 18 and wrap up with mail here from Ben Flay regarding season 18 retrospective, who said it peaked at State of Decay. And that's the mail.
All right. Thank you, Riley. Definitely appreciate that enormous amount of work you put in to collate that enormous amount of mail. That's definitely a lot more than we have than usual, even if we didn't do 2 episodes at once. So thank you, dear listeners, for sending everything in. As a reminder, we really do love getting your feedback, thoughts, comments, and questions. And we do try and read out as much of it as possible on the show, even when it does take the best part of 20 minutes. So please do get in touch. You can contact us through Facebook and Instagram at Watchers4D, or you can email us at watchers4d@gmail.com. Additionally, we would absolutely love it if you subscribe to the podcast if you're not doing so already, and if you dropped us a review or rating on your podcast platform of choice. Now, moving behind the scenes on Castrovalva, and this is unfortunately going to be another fairly long segment because we have a new Doctor, guys. So we're going to start with the casting of the 5th Doctor, even though that really happened during season 18. And it was during the summer of 1980 that producer John Nathan Turner and the then script editor Christopher H. Bidmead began to suspect that Tom Baker would likely leave the show at the end of the season. And with that in mind, JNT began to consider actors for the role of the next Doctor. Finding himself uncertain about the direction to take, he was sure about one thing. Tom would cast a long shadow after appearing on the show for 7 years, and so the new Doctor would need to be as different as possible from Tom Baker. Nathan Turner initially approached character actor Richard Griffiths, perhaps best known at the time for his humorous Shakespearean roles, as well as a part in the 1975 film It Shouldn't Happen to a Vet, but he was unavailable. Also considered was Scots actor Ian Cuthbertson, who had memorably appeared in programs such as Budgie, The Stone Tape, and Sutherland's Law, and he'd also played Garen in The Rebos Operation back in season 16. Nathan Turner's office wall, however, was covered with photographs from various productions on which he had previously worked, and prior to becoming Doctor Who's producer, one of his most significant assignments had been as production unit manager on the veterinary drama All Creatures Great and Small, from which he had already recruited a number of writers and directors to Doctor Who. His attention kept being drawn to one of these photos, a charity cricket match in which All Creatures Great and Small star Peter Davison had been involved. Nathan Turner realised that the young and fair-haired Davison was a striking visual contrast to Baker, and he knew that All Creatures Great and Small had earned Davison a sizable fanbase which might follow him to another show. And during October 1980, Nathan Turner contacted Davison and offered him the role of the 5th Doctor. Now, Davison's initial reaction was to say no. He was uncomfortable with the idea of getting involved in a show like Doctor Who, which had become a British institution by this point. He was also concerned that at 29 years old, he was just too young to play the Doctor. But Nathan Turner was not so easily deterred, and he gave Davison more time to consider the offer. After a few weeks, Davison came back after realising that he simply couldn't bear to see someone else win the role, and informed JNT of his change of heart. To help audiences make the transition to the new Doctor, JNT and Bidmead conceived a trilogy which would bridge seasons 18 and 19, and this arc would be linked by the involvement of a rejuvenated version of the Master. He would of course be introduced in The Keeper of Traken, which we've already talked about, cause the Doctor's regeneration in Bidmead's story Logopolis, which we've also already talked about, and then face the new Doctor in the 19th season premiere, which was to be called Project Zeta Sigma. This was to be written by John Flanagan and Andrew McCulloch, the team responsible for season 18's Meglos. However, in February 1981, with production less than 2 months away and Bidmead having been succeeded by trainee Anthony Root, it was determined that major elements of Project Zeta Sigma were highly impractical and replacement scripts would have to be found. Given the quality of Meglos, this was probably for the best. This would normally cause a fair amount of panic behind the scenes, but early in 1981, the Doctor Who production team learned that they would have the luxury of several extra months before the transmission of season 19. Peter Davison was already committed to a second season of the sitcom Sink or Swim to be recorded while the production of Doctor Who was paused in June and July. Sink or Swim was intended for broadcast in the autumn of 1981, and the BBC were wary of overexposing Davison by featuring him in the lead in 2 shows airing simultaneously. So, it was decided that Doctor Who would be held back until January 1982, the first time since 1974-1975 that the show would premiere in the winter rather than the autumn. Now, an additional factor here was that Doctor Who had really not done well in the ratings throughout season 18, as it was put up against the glossy American import Buck Rogers in the 25th Century over on ITV. Alan Hart, who was the controller of programs for BBC One, decided that Doctor Who's traditional Saturday tea time slot, which it had been in since its debut in 1963, was no longer appropriate for the show. At the same time, the BBC was studying the public appetite for twice-weekly shows as they prepared to launch the soap that would ultimately become EastEnders. Given that Doctor Who was a well-established programme, the BBC considered it to be a good subject for experimentation, and so it was decided that season 19 would air on Monday and Tuesday evenings, so 2 episodes a week. As a result, Nathan Turner now enjoyed a lot more flexibility to rearrange his recording schedule. He had now come to the conclusion that Davison would be better served if he could tape several stories before tackling his debut adventure, hooking audiences with a more fully formed Fifth Doctor at the start of the season. What the hell happened to that idea? It was therefore decided that the serial chosen to replace Project Zeta Sigma would be made 4th, after 4 to Doomsday, The Visitation, and Kinder, which we'll be discussing in future episodes. To write the new premiere, Nathan Turner and Root contacted Christopher Hecking Bidmead, who had returned to freelance writing after leaving Doctor Who. They requested a story featuring the Master in which the new Doctor would be suffering from regeneration trauma induced by the entropy field encountered in Logopolis. It was felt that this turmoil would help establish the Fifth Doctor as being more vulnerable than his seemingly indomitable predecessor. For his part, Bidmead wanted to resume the exploration of the TARDIS that he had begun in Logopolis, while also contemplating the role played by perspective in distinguishing between reality and illusion. A starting point for Bidmead was his recollection of Nathan Turner's irritation at the optical illusions depicted in 2 prints which hung in the office of Graham MacDonald, the head of series and serials. The images had been drawn by the Dutch artist and mathematician M.C. Escher, whose works included Relativity, in which figures walked up and down all sides of a series of staircases, Belvedere, in which the perspective of building changed between floors, and Ascending and Descending, in which a staircase endlessly looped back onto itself. Bidmead thought that an environment exhibiting these sorts of traits could complement a story which dealt with the mathematical concept of recursion, in which each member of a sequence is generated by one or more of the preceding members. On March the 9th, Bidmead was commissioned to write his storyline, which at the time was called The Visitor. While developing his ideas, he was inspired by a 1930 Escher lithograph called Castrovalva, a landscape which depicted a village in the Abruzzo region of Italy, sitting high atop a sheer cliff. Bidmead decided to use a similar image in his narrative, and by the time he was asked to provide full scripts on April the 8th, 1981, the title had actually just straight out become Castrovalva. By this point, Root had left Doctor Who already, and Nathan Turner was serving as the program's script editor until the beginning of Eric Saywood's appointment in the middle of the month. Nathan Turner instructed Bidmead to motivate the changes to Nissa's costume, which had been introduced in 4 to Doomsday, which of course had already been recorded, which included the replacement of her skirt with trousers and the elimination of her tiara and fur stole. Good, because that shit was impractical.
How dare you?
We'll talk more about that later.
The tiara was amazing.
It was amazing, but impractical. He also indicated that Bidmead should depict the Doctor's addition of a celery stick to the lapel of his cricketing jacket, because why not? The director assigned to Castrovalva was Fiona Cumming, who had worked on the show as both an assistant floor manager and a production assistant on several occasions since 1966. Joining her behind-the-scenes team were returning production manager Margaret Hayhoe, returning designer Janet Budden, who had previously designed season 18's Full Circle, returning composer Paddy Kingsland, and he of course had worked on 4 stories during season 18, and newcomer Odile Dix-Miro providing costumes, and she is known for her work on The Blackadder, Gormenghast, Chernobyl, High Rise, and Last Night in Soho. And she and her team, that's Fiona Cumming and her team, travelled to East Sussex for location filming, which began on September the 1st, 1981. And although Crosley Park in Berkshire had served as the grounds of the Pharos project in Logopolis, the Crowborough Wireless Telegraph Station in Duderswell was now used for this purpose, creating some continuity errors, including where exactly the TARDIS was. An unintended consequence of making 3 other series prior to Castrovalva was that Cumming had to encourage the series regulars to behave with less familiarity towards one another. Now, unusually, Anthony Ainley was effectively credited twice on Castrovalva Episode 3. To avoid spoiling the fact that the Portreeve was really the Master in disguise, Ainley was listed as playing the evil Time Lord, while Neil Toynay was billed as the Portreeve. And Neil Toynay, of course, was an anagram of Tony Ainley, devised by Cummings' husband. Meanwhile, Nathan Turner insisted that Davison should henceforth be credited as playing the Doctor rather than Doctor Who, breaking with a tradition that dated all the way back to the show's very first episode. The opening part of Castrovalva was, of course, broadcast on January the 4th, 1982, marking the return of Doctor Who to British TV after an absence of more than 8 months, the longest in the programme's history to that point. And the story wrapped up its transmission the following week on Tuesday, January the 12th. And I do want to mention there had been a little repeat season called The 5 Faces of Doctor Who in the interim, where there was a story from each Doctor rebroadcast, and Castrovalva then kind of capped that, and Logopolis actually got a rebroadcast just before Castrovalva. All right, I've been talking a huge amount, so I'm going to hand on over to Diana for the short summary. Over to you, Diana.
After Baker cocoons himself and metamorphosizes into the dish of the day, Adric finally becomes the problem everyone always claims he has been. And the Doctor has a rough hangover from regenerating, so it's up to our Laverne and Shirley to save the day.
Yes.
Tegan's practical sense and Nissa's biotechnical know-how fight the Master one-on-one, basically, with his pet Adric, to stop the TARDIS from hurtling back to Event 1, because we don't even get to Castrovalva until the beginning of Episode 3. But once we get there, we're swept up in a recursionary existence, where the Master has taken the time to write 30 volumes of thick fake history just to be ravaged by the very people he created.
Awesome. Thank you, Diana. All right, let's talk about this one, because this is a wild ride.
Julie? Since you're the only person who hasn't spoken for any period of time since we started, which was 35 minutes ago.
I want to talk about, first off, we have a recap as an opener, which we don't always get, and then continue to have the worst recaps ever.
With that recap being a cold open, that's the first cold open we've had.
I like the cold open.
I do and don't. And also, since Anthony mentioned that Logopolis was aired basically right before this, it doesn't even make sense that they had to do a recap.
Yeah. It does somewhat ruin Davison's first kind of run on the show by having Tom Baker rock up for a minute beforehand. It was just completely unnecessary.
Yep.
But that does mean we get Peter Davison's face in the credits for the first time.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yay.
I think I've also seemed to not quite grasp is how young Peter Davison is. I've seen so many pictures of him and never really thought about it. But then actually seeing him act things out, I'm like, oh, he's just a baby.
Mm-hmm. He was 29. The only Doctor younger than him, I think. I forget how old Shooty is. But Matt Smith was, I think, 27 when he was cast.
Yeah, I think that Peter had been the youngest before him.
Yeah.
Like, so young and baby face, and it's all smooth. And then he also, like, sometimes wears the glasses, so we get some smart Doctor going.
Can we talk about them running from the guards? Because some of the things Tegan says and does are absolutely unhinged.
Yo,
firstly, take your hands off me. This is an official uniform. Like, doll, you're an air stewardess.
No, I live for everything that Tegan does.
We're perfectly harmless, unfortunately, and then she steals an ambulance. She full-on pulls a Barbara.
I love it so much. I love her.
To drive like 15 meters.
Yeah. And then fucking Adric gets captured while everyone else escapes.
One thing before we get to him being captured, did it seem to anyone else that he seemed a lot more confident? Just as a character or the actor? Did he go through puberty or something between seasons? Because it really does seem different.
Tom Baker left.
Oh, well, Baker left. Okay. If this is like the 4th episode they're filming, and so he's had that time with the new doctor, with the new companions, he probably has gotten a different vibe.
But even taking that aside, if you think about it from a purely in-universe perspective, you have a new doctor who is clearly suffering, and you have 2 people who join the TARDIS after him. He is the veteran at this point.
Mm-hmm. And he's barely in this.
Right.
Bless his heart.
And Nyssa was fully ready once they get into the TARDIS to take off without him. Only Tegan remembers him.
Yeah, Nyssa the whole time is just kind of like, okay.
It's so interesting because in the episode when she's introduced, it seemed like her and Adric got along really well. Mm-hmm. But I guess in some ways she's just decided that I don't need him or something, because here it doesn't seem like she cares as much as I would expect.
It seems that Nissa's written differently than how she was in that episode, Keeper of Traken. There she seems to have a bit more of open emotions. Same thing came up in Legopolis. It feels like in this one, they really are trying to write her as being a more of a cold, and that's, I don't mean that in a bad connotation, but just not an emotional, very, reserved person that's really focused on logic more so than she ever was before.
She is a strong, independent scientist who don't need no mathematical genius.
That part. But I also think when we want to look for that in-universe reason, she's being actively terrorized by her dead father.
Yeah.
True. Good point.
And there's even a comment about that, I think, is it in part 3 or part 2, where she says something about, I hate seeing that face, or something along those lines.
Yeah, I suppose that's fair.
Yeah, it's rough on her.
I know it starts somewhere probably late in part 1, but I want to ask the question before I forget about it. Riley.
Yes.
Does the clarion bell, whatever you want to call it, does that bother you as much as the foghorn from the Horror of Fang Rock?
No, it does not. That's a good question.
The cloister bell, yes, sorry.
No, I love the cloister bell. That's a classic Doctor Who noise.
But not the foghorn.
The foghorn just seems more disruptive to me. I can't explain it. I'm just odd.
Sorry. That's been sitting in my mind since I was listening to it. So, sorry, everyone.
So, there's a very questionable choice with the Doctor in this story. And it starts in part 1 with the Doctor not really knowing who he is without there being a parallel plot. So, if you think about the regeneration trauma in Spearhead from Space, with the 3rd Doctor, you have the Brigadier and Liz going off and investigating this Auton thing, right? In Robot with Tom, they just moved beyond it quickly. Here we dedicate basically the first 2 episodes to the Doctor's regeneration trauma and the impact that's having on the TARDIS crew, without there really being much in the way of a parallel plot beyond occasionally the Master showing up on a screen and going, heh 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 heh. Right?
Well,
so
agreed.
It's a very questionable choice to make that the focus here, because it doesn't give a lot to watch. And what we end up doing is seeing the Doctor unraveling Tom's scarf, which I think is a really cool image because it is kind of emblematic of the shedding of his old skin and removing the lost vestiges of his previous personality.
But the sound effect that went with it was very bad.
Yeah. And then we have him doing impressions of William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton as well.
Oh, that was great.
But otherwise, plot-wise, yeah, you kind of ate the Edge of Destruction a little with the TARDIS going weird and taking them back to the creation of the galaxy where they might get destroyed. But it lacks the weird charm of the Edge of Destruction.
Yeah, it wasn't as eerie as Edge of Destruction was. Not that it needed to be, but the atmosphere was definitely very odd. And I think if they had leaned a little bit more into the Adric Master thing sooner, then you would have more of a parallel plot.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, but the problem is the Master is so fucking camp. You can't escape. You're mine, Adric. Mine! Good Lord. You can see the teeth marks on the scenery.
Yes.
I also just find it interesting of why he wanted Adric. but it took me a while to figure out why he wanted Adric.
Because he wanted Adric in his sex dungeon, and if you look closely, Adric appears to be enjoying it.
Okay, but the way I also noticed that, and yes, I was very uncomfortable.
You two have such dirty, dirty minds. I was just going to make up the life a little joke that he wanted Adric as a wall ornament.
I mean, it's not a dirty mind. Adric very clearly is enjoying it at certain points.
How do you know that he's just not well hung, Anthony?
Oh.
Or the way that he was hanging up in the harness. I also would give that, because sometimes that happens. Because they did, when they first show him strung up in the master's sex dungeon, because the master canonically wants to kiss everybody now. They do a back-to-back shot with him and the doctor having a hard time in the hallway, where it's just too many tight pants. And I was really unhappy about it. The direction of this whole series, I did not like.
And another thing, too, to go back with a harness, depending on what type of harness and things like that, as a rock climber, I will say that a lot of different types of harnesses, especially if they go around the waist, do accentuate the package.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The timey-wimey sex swing.
My headcanon is that Adric was enjoying this. Okay.
Look, he's allowed to have a good time.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
We promise we're not children.
We are.
We are, absolutely. Whereas the doctor has a room that smells like roses.
And speaking of his rooms, I'm a little confused, and maybe I've just figured it out. When he's wandering around and then he finds a room that seems completely decorated for his new-to-be style.
Yep.
Does that imply that the TARDIS, or he already had that set up to eventually go with as his style, or he's just meandering around and that's just some random room filled with knickknacks in the TARDIS and he's like, oh, I like the look of that. That's what I was trying to figure out.
Yeah, I don't know. My headcanon is, for some reason, the TARDIS decided to pick him out a costume. What I do like about it is we do get him in that costume from part 1. So that establishes that very, very quickly. That's not something we always get. Even in modern Who, if you think about Jodie ran around in Peter Capaldi's costume for a full story before finally getting into her costume, and Matt Smith did the same with David Tennant, and so on and so forth. So I do like that, but yeah, I think the TARDIS probably picked it out for him.
And can we go ahead and discuss some of the other odd things in this episode? Perhaps the Zero Room at the levitation. What the hell is going on with that?
Don't ask too many questions.
I know, it's just, why are they adding in just this absolute strangeness for no purpose? Like, how are we supposed to deal with that canon-wise going forward for other regenerations? Gotta let him do his levitation thing. Like, what? What is happening?
I think the intent here was this regeneration was particularly traumatic because of the whole entropy thing and the falling off a fucking radio tower. God, I'm cursing a lot tonight. I think this one was kind of intended to be particularly traumatic, so I kind of get it, but yeah, we're not going to see the Zero Room ever again.
I mean, it mostly got destroyed and was turned into a little coffin for the doctor, so yeah. There's
the Zero
that.
cabinet.
That stupid cabinet.
My favorite was when the Castrovalvans had turned it into a laundry trough.
That was wild.
But before we get there, we're still in part 1.
One thing I will say before we move on is we've had the different types of regenerations, right? The longer drawn out and the shorter and all that other stuff. The further and further I go along, the less I like the drawn out, because I hate them just being like, oh, I'm so confused, or oh, I'm incapacitated and I need tea and I need... No, just no.
Not the tea. Yeah, that's what I felt like, even if they had done it for just one episode, because it was still impacting plot, like in episode 3 and 4, and I just needed them to be competent by then.
I don't mean to get too far into New Who, because I know obviously we're not there yet, but my favorite regeneration story is the 11th Hour, and the reason for that is, in that story, the Doctor is still clearly struggling with the after effects of the regeneration, but he is still competent. Mm-hmm. He's still able to do his thing and run around and sort it out, but he's not quite right yet. Whereas ones like this basically incapacitate the Doctor.
I didn't even mind the channeling the other Doctors make sense from a regeneration perspective. So if we had stuck with that and then quickly got on with it, then I would have been fine. I mean, he had his what did he call it? His transport of delight. I mean, excuse me, sir. Do you really need one of those? The doctor shouldn't need one.
We'll talk about that in part 2. But what I will say is this is by no means the worst after effects of a regeneration. There is something worse to come, but I will leave it at that.
Hey, you watch your mouth.
Whoa.
I'm not talking about the doctor. I'm just talking about the story. And
oh,
anyway.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough.
So our end of part 1 is the master pushing them into the creation of the galaxy.
Yeah,
into the
farewell,
Big
my
Bang.
friends.
Yeah.
Farewell forever. God, he is camp.
He is absolutely is at its worst, I think, in part 4 in the fireplace scene. That was insane, but we'll get there.
Yeah, let's talk about part 2.
I think the one thing that really came to my mind when I think about part 2 is I really am liking Nyssa because she is just focused. She just wants to get things sorted and calmly. While Tegan is getting bent out of shape about everything, Nyssa is just focused. And I think that is really, really great when we were speaking about how this serial just goes on and on about trying to get the Fifth Doctor up to speed. And it just feels like the story, as you were saying, Anthony, isn't really going anywhere.
Yeah.
Because we're waiting for the Doctor to get up and going. It's like he's dragging the story down because we have to wait for him to get better again. And so at that point, the only person who seems to be wanting to get things sorted and get the plot moving is Nyssa.
I'll agree in real life, if I were to know them, I would prefer Nyssa, but Tegan is just so much more entertaining and she keeps at least things interesting in the fact that if it was just Nyssa, then I'd just be like, okay, well, there's nothing to laugh at. There's no like other things going on. It would be drawn out and boring, in my opinion.
In all honesty, there's not a huge amount that happens in this episode, right? The Doctor gets his wheelchair and becomes totally ungovernable.
Oh my God, doesn't he though?
Tegan talks about needing enormous thrust. The Master propositions Adric. 25% of the TARDIS gets jettisoned to give Tegan that enormous thrust. And then we end up at Castrovalva. And Tegan climbing trees in her official uniform.
I'm going to go out and make what might be a controversial statement. I am okay with Tegan in Legopolis. I'm okay with Tegan in Castrovalva. And I totally understand why she's acting the way she is, because she's still discombobulated. She's still kind of freshly thrown into this madness when she just wanted to live her normal life and go to her job interview. But she's got to just stop flying off the rails and getting pissed off at every damn thing all the time. Do you have other reactions to things than that? It's totally understandable. If I was in her situation, I'd be pissed off all the time too. I'd be like, why am I here? What is happening? Why aren't I back home? But after a while, it's like, okay, we get it. Totally understandable, but let's kind of focus on the problem at hand and then maybe we can get you back or something. It's just getting a little much. That's what I'm saying.
We're going to have a fun time for a few stories.
To be fair, when the Doctor regenerates, and this is the first time she's ever met him, she is not thinking she's going to get back anytime soon.
On Nyssa, I do just want to say she is very hyper-focused on problem solving and getting them out of the situation they're in. I do think that's a trauma response. I think she is shutting down from everything except the things she needs to be focusing on. Her father has been taken over by the Master and she is forced to see him wear a younger version of her father's face. Her planet has been destroyed along with, I don't know what it was, a third of the universe or something. She has lost everything. And as was pointed out earlier, she is now being tormented by the Master. I think this is very much a trauma response from her.
When we talk about her being very focused on whatever she's doing, I was struck by the deadpanness of Nyssa in this episode. There didn't seem to be a lot of emotion coming out of her. And that's what I was struck by, especially with that comment of, I hate seeing that face.
Yeah.
It was honestly a very subtle thing that is unexpected that I actually really appreciated because it was very subtle to where you could just kind of look past it. But it seems like it is like really strong grief.
And then, of course, later in the episode, she falls down the slightest slope and into a creek. So she also gets to change into trousers and now has pockets, presumably.
After a really weird Lucille Ball moment.
Yes.
Yeah. One thing I appreciated about this whole thing was the fact that we did get just a team up of Tegan and Nyssa, and the ladies are the ones figuring a lot of things out and making things happen. So I appreciated that aspect of it. I mean, we kept Adric out of it for essentially all of it.
Yeah. Big props to him on that one.
Part 2, a big part of it is just padding this out. And I see what Bidmead was trying to do here, and that he was trying to divide this story into 2 distinct acts. So you really get into Castrovalva in parts 3 and 4. So if you're seeing this broadcast parts 1 and 2 on consecutive nights, you then move the story into a second act on the second 2 consecutive nights. It's a fairly smart way to structure it. It's just a shame about everything else.
I would just like to get the idea of people watching those episodes live, seeing the name of the serial, and at the end of part 2 going, what the hell is a Castrovalva?
Castrovalve oil. We end part 2 with the Doctor having given Nyssa and Tegan the slip. He's no longer in the Zero cabinet. That's our cliffhanger. There's a little blood on the ground. We're into part 3.
And once again, is it because they're on film and not on video? Why is it on Doctor Who that so many times when they shoot outdoors on location, the resolution looks so much better than when they're shooting in studio?
I'm fairly certain at this point they were still doing location shooting on film.
Yeah, that's got to be it. Because it looked great. So good.
The Blu-ray release is gorgeous for that reason. You know, you are seeing it in HD, in true HD.
You get to see it, those Technicolor Ewoks, they just be popping off the screen.
Why did we have to make them that?
Yeah, I don't know.
So racist. Why?
But equally, they all talk in sort of cod Shakespeare language. Bidmead has a lot of weaknesses, but dialogue is definitely one of his bigger weaknesses.
Oh, God.
Yeah, nothing really popped out as being noteworthy. No quotable things for me.
I have one quotable line, and we'll get to that in part 4.
Oh, also, whenever we get introduced to Shardavan, I really thought I heard Saruman the first time and had to rewind.
Of course, shout out to Murgrave, who's played by Michael Shard, who we've seen multiple times in other Doctor Who stories and is a little bit of a legend. Big fan of his. We, of course, saw him in The Ark, in The Mind of Evil, and in both Pyramids of Mars and The Invisible Enemy. He's been fairly iconic, so good to see him again.
And minus the racism, the costumes for all of the other Castrovalvans, I really dug. I thought they were really interesting, and I thought they did a very good job on them.
I didn't particularly care for the makeup. I think...
Ooh, fair enough.
Yeah. It's one of those where I'm like, I get what they were trying to do, and I wouldn't necessarily say that they missed the mark, but I hated it.
So when we meet the Portreeve, how long was it for each of you before you realized that that was the Master?
This is so embarrassing. It literally took me to like 5 seconds before the reveal.
Okay.
I'm not kidding.
I made the mistake of reading your notes before I watched it.
So you had it spoiled. Diana, did you remember from your previous watch through?
Absolutely not. And I'm going to make you feel better, Riley.
Thank
It took
you.
me until the moment where I was like, oh, fuck. And I've watched this before.
I knew, and so I was scrutinizing it really hard and was looking at him, the close-ups of his face, the close-ups of the Master's face, and I was thinking, this looks kind of obvious, but equally I knew. So I was actively looking for it, so I was very curious you weren't, whether you saw it, when the answer is no.
Right, it is the reveal scene. It was like the way that they lit him as he like kind of straightens up his back.
Yeah.
Yeah, that right there when I saw him, like, oh, shit. Right there. And I think about that, and I think about the scene where the Doctor is resting and the Portreeve is ambling out of the room all hunched over, and of course they're doing as much effort to try to not get too much light on his face, to try to hide it. And I think that was a fine job. I mean, it fooled me.
I think they did enough distraction with other characters, making you unsure about who you were supposed to be focusing on in the first place. that's how they get away with a lot of it.
And also with the story of the Portreeve, it just, we've had so many times we've had master stories where the master comes into a community or something and gets control of them. And it's very clear who it is if it's not being shown in scenes for us outside of the doctor and the crew. It's always some sort of line of, yes, that stranger just moved into town 2 weeks ago. I'm like, oh, I wonder who that could be. But this time it was set up better.
And I think even with me knowing ahead of time, I will say that the whole Shardavan thing was too obvious. That's the only one where I was like, I really don't think we should be going in that direction.
Yeah.
One thing I will say, I like to talk about things that make my dogs bark or make them uncertain because that's what I do. And for some reason, the director decided to have really, really loud birds chirping. And that's what my dog decided that he needed to bark at within Doctor Who. Not beeping, but birds.
I would also like to point out that we did kind of cover, I wanted to wait for the Portreeve to be part of the conversation when we were discussing the costumes. I really like that the Portreeve is rocking like 2 hats on top of each other stacked. In my headcanon in Castrovalva, I believe that social rank is signified by how many hats you have stacked on your head. So I was waiting for somebody to come walking in there with 3 and I'd be like, oh shit, do not mess with that person.
All of the hats.
Also, we haven't really discussed the music too much in our ambulance hijack. The music there was hilarious and a lot of fun. While we're in Castrovalva, outside of a little like few bits that try to add a little bit of suspense or tension, like the underlying kind of mood to it all really sounds like music you would hear playing in the background of a New Age spa.
You see, I was thinking this very much sounded like a continuation of the music in Logopolis. Same composer, is part of a trilogy almost. So I was getting that vibe, but I hear what you're saying, Riley.
The first episode or 2 were a little bit more bouncy, or when you had the cloister bell and everything, had a little bit more of the drama effect. But yeah, I think parts 3 and 4 didn't lean into the drama at all. It was just like, we're going to be all serene. It's nice. How many times have we had children speak on Doctor Who?
Not many.
Yeah.
Because we actually have a child who looks normal and is doing a normal kid thing of bouncing a ball. I was just astounded that was what was happening.
Yeah. Let's talk about recursive occlusion.
I haven't thought about recursion since I left Georgia Tech.
Nerd.
I know.
I really like the idea, actually. This one place and they're moving round and round in circles. They keep coming back to the square. And it's not executed that badly either. Even when they kind of pan out and you see a bit more of how it looks, for the time it's done quite well.
Yeah, I thought it was fine. I liked the idea. I thought that was actually interesting. In the serial, it's a shame that it didn't show up till 3/4 of the way into it. I'm like, wow, this would have been an amazing cliffhanger at the end of part 1.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that is effectively our cliffhanger, is when they realize where they are. Recursive occlusion. We're caught in a space-time trap. Cliffhanger. We're into part 4. We have another absurdly long reprise, which made Julie furious.
Yes, it did.
And the Castrovalvans clearly have no idea that they're part of a recursion.
Yeah, that is a hilarious bit there. The map.
I love that scene.
It's just...
My pharmacy is here, and it's here, and it's here, and it's... Wait,
yeah.
What?
They never realized what this was until the doctor starts helping them to figure out. And that's one thing I really do like, is this doctor isn't just telling them, he's giving them enough clues so that they figure it out. And that's a hugely different approach.
Yes.
I love it.
Yeah, I really liked that scene. It was a moment where I go, okay, all right, I like this one. The rest of this has been, but this is nice.
The thing I really enjoyed about that particular scene, as he's showing it to one after another, is that I couldn't help but feel that that would be just a wonderful premise for a bit in a Monty Python movie. Like when they were trying to explain like weight, density, and things like that, to have to explain that to someone, it just sounds really funny because of how absolutely unusual and strange it is. Wow. Man, I would have been so hooked on this serial if that was like episode 2 in the first like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really
Exactly.
interesting premise, and I would love to see it come back to at some point, especially because all of the citizens couldn't see out of it as well. So it really lent to that idea of they don't know that they're a part of it, and who does seem like the outlier. And I felt that that part of it was really well done. And I think at this point it might have been by accident.
Oh, I definitely think it was by accident.
Yeah, but it was really well done.
As we're heading towards the kind of culmination of the story, they've realized that the history of Castrovalva as written in the books in Shardavan's library have effectively been forged or invented.
The fiction of Castrovalva.
They're fictional.
Yes.
Yeah. And everyone initially thinks it's Shardavan who did that. And I did realize that Shardavan sounds a little like one of Roger Delgado's disguises. So it kind of fits.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that could be the master, except the Doctor knows it's not and uses everything else as a distraction so he can talk to Shardavan on his own. There's that little manipulative streak there that I think is fascinating.
Because he's also very subtle about it.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of other times where the Doctor has done something similar, but it's much more blatant and much more, I don't want to say mean, but in some ways mean, if that makes sense.
This is also where the camp factor gets really ramped up.
Oh, yeah.
Once the portree reveals himself as the master and he's talking about the Doctor should be ready for the final meeting with his master.
And do we notice the word choices there? His master. I know he has his little sex dungeon, but do we really have to go out and say it?
Yeah.
Yeah, he wants kisses.
The master clearly sees him as the top in this situation, and
And he is not.
Yeah, he is not.
I'm not sure the Doctor would be willing to submit to that if there was any consent in this.
Is the master
no.
a brat?
The master is definitely a brat. I want kisses because I deserve them.
You don't want me to misbehave. I'll create a completely new society out of fiction and trap you there in a recursive time loop.
And then when everything starts falling apart, he throws a fucking tantrum. He is definitely a brat.
Yeah, can't get the zero coffin open. Just, God.
Yeah, I thought the second it became clear that the master had created those books, my immediate thought was, were they handwritten? Did he type them? The master is known for spending so much time.
He definitely handwrote them.
Like, right? Can you imagine? He's up there in his little TARDIS, candlelit, scribbling away on the fantasies of who Castrovalva is, just to kiss the Doctor.
I'm very sad about the master being able to change the appearance of his because I really like the column.
Oh, isn't
Yeah.
it cool?
Yeah, I guess it's a fireplace now. I guess that's fine. But the column was better.
I like the column.
The master definitely wants the Doctor to like his column.
Oh my God.
Oh, boy.
Sorry. I think Riley's the one who's just like, I'm just going to let this happen. Okay, so... Okay, we have Shardavan, who decides to be the hero, even though we don't get to see him act. We see the beginning of him being a hero, and then all of a sudden he just is gone.
I would like to have seen him actually do it, but I do love the setup of him up there
Oh, yes.
on the chandelier, whatever you want to call it. And of course, he has that great line, "You made us man of evil,
But we are free.
but we are free."
Yeah.
I would have loved it so much if they would have cut, and for that entire scene, right, and you see him swing by, and it would have been, "You made us man of evil, but we are free." Whee!
No, but we are free.
You named the line I thought was pretty iconic, Riley. I've been quoting the master the whole time because he is just so camp. There is one other line in this story I want to point out, which is where the Doctor asks a group of Castrovalvans, which is the quickest way out of here. They all point in different directions because recursion. And the Doctor responds with, "Yes, well, that's democracy for you." I liked that one as well. There are some good lines in this. That wretched square again. But all of the cod Shakespearean dialogue is just so ham-fisted. As we get to the end, Adric's rescued, the Master escapes, Castrovalva starts folding up into itself, so I'm guessing all of those fictional people die.
Let's hold on that for a second. So they go to escape, and I forget that guy's name, but he
Murgrave
kind of goes back, right, to...
Yeah.
Because the Master went and zombified the rest of the folks there. Well, mind control, okay, because, my favorite, mind control, and, it looked like they were killing him.
Yeah,
and that was
it's really sad.
Really cool image, though.
Yes.
That's one of the best directed parts of this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, if you weren't saying that, I had that written down. I thought that was so visually striking. I was like, wow, this looks great. Once again, could have used these parts maybe earlier on in the serial instead of having Davison wander around trying on clothes and doing his one-man show of previous doctors for 2 episodes.
Yeah, and then, of course, at the very end, as we get past all that, Tegan is so pleased at herself for flying the TARDIS, and then the Doctor's like, actually, no, that was Adric, and everything else was a projection.
Did not need to go there.
No, he should have let her have the win. And then we end with, well, whoever I feel like, it's absolutely splendid. And that's the end of the story. And the first 5th Doctor story is complete. And Diana, you're going to get asked this for the first time. Every time we get a new Doctor, we ask the question to everyone, and we keep asking it until the answer is yes. Is he the Doctor yet? Julie?
I don't think yet.
Yeah. Riley?
My answer? No, not yet.
Diana?
No.
Yeah. No all round. We are unanimous. All right. Very quickly with our running metrics. I didn't catch any I'll explain laters.
There was a time for lessons later. Does that count?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
it does. Good job, Diana.
Hey.
Obviously, no jelly babies. We will see them again, but they're just not very often anymore. Now, the biggie, the camp count.
Oh, God.
I mean, it is all the Tree Mass Master, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't go full out because...
He's not quite matching my boy Soldeed.
No.
No.
Not at that levels, but pretty darn close.
We want to give him an 8?
Yeah, that sounds good. I like
One
that.
for each leg of the spider from his web.
Oh, boy.
Do you like my boy web?
Oh, God. All right, well, we'll move on and actually rate the story. And because there is an order that we go through on this, she's going to feel persecuted because she always does. But Julie, you get to go first.
Great.
I'm so sorry.
I know. All right, I'll try to be short and to the point. Let's see if that actually happens. So I didn't love the story. I didn't hate the story. I think there's some good bits here. I think that Tegan and Nyssa got a lot of love in this. We didn't have to go too far into Adric, which is great, but we did have a crazy master. I still enjoyed it. I could probably watch it again, so I'm not going to harp on all of the crazy things. And the recursion bit was nice, even though I haven't thought about it in a long time. So I'm going to give it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pharmacy locations out of 10.
All right, Riley, you're up next.
First episodes for new doctors are always tough. They have to introduce the new doctor. They got to show respect for the previous doctor. They got to set up the dynamics between the companions and the new doctor. It's a lot of heavy lifting that needs to be done. But as you mentioned earlier, Anthony, there have been Doctor Who serials that introduce new doctors that have done this really, really well because they have an ongoing plot. They have something else going on besides us being laden with waiting for the doctor to get a nap. This is one of those serials that is not good. For that reason, the story limps along till episode 3. It does start getting a bit more interesting towards the last 1.5 episodes, but that's a little too late. I think Davison will be a fine doctor. Right now, I can get a sense for him, but he is not the doctor yet, as we just answered. The writing is poor. There's too much dead time in this one. This is just really uneven and weak. I give this 3.5 Adric wall ornaments out of 10.
All right, Diana, what have you got?
It was okay. It was silly in parts, which I enjoyed. The recursion part was accidentally inspired. The rest of it was just, I felt lost. I felt very confused. I wondered when we were going to get to the next bit, pretty much almost the whole time. So I think I'm looking at about 5. minutes until event 1 out of 10.
Very nice.
I think I'm in agreement. The first 2 parts are pretty limp. It really does drag out. I didn't particularly enjoy watching those first 2 episodes, and that's a problem. I was definitely clock watching at times. And when we do get to Castrovalva, the cod Shakespearean dialogue kills me. It's not enjoyable to listen to. It's not good. No, thank you. However, as Diana mentioned, the recursion aspect was accidentally inspired. Tegan and Nyssa are fantastic. I kind of love how utterly over the top the master is. It's definitely one of those kind of guilty pleasure moments in that I actively know it's not good. But he is really fun to watch. He is a highlight. But yeah, I think overall, I'm on exactly the same page as Diana. I'm going to go with 5 staircases that lead to themselves out of 10, which gives us a story average for this of a measly 4.88, which I will point out is the lowest score we have had for a Doctor's opening story so far.
Wow.
Yeah, even Robot rated higher.
Robot was better.
Yeah. So overall, not great. Not great. But that brings us to the end of the podcast episode. We will, of course, be back next time as we delve further into the 5th Doctor era with 4 to Doomsday. Thank you, as always, for listening. And until next time, have a good one. You have been listening to Watchers in the Fourth Dimension with Diana Burney, Riley Schreck, Julie Philippek, and myself, Anthony Williams. This episode, Is the Master a Brat?, was recorded on Tuesday the 11th of March 2025. If this is your first time listening into the show, all of our previous episodes are available wherever you like to get your podcasts. You can interact with us on Facebook and Instagram at @Watchers4D, and you can also email us at watchers4d@gmail.com. If you're enjoying the show, please do subscribe and consider leaving us a review or rating on your favorite podcasting app. All of those things really do help the show. And always remember, harnesses can make you look excited apparently. Not sure I buy that, but the others insisted.